I had a pretty, I would say, non-traditional childhood. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, so about 90 miles away from the nearest mall or movie theater or civilization in southern Arkansas. Um, and so that's where I lived until I was 13. There wasn't a lot around. I mean, I remember when I grew up, we had, three TV stations and, not a ton to do. So I spent a lot of time, out in the woods. And my parents actually got me my first computer, when I was 8 years old. So that got me into technology. I mean, frankly, it was by default. There wasn't anything else to do.
What did your parents do?
So my father was a forester, actually. He works in the woods.
What does that entail? Like, what is the day-to-day of that job for folks like me? And I'm sure 99% of our audience that probably has not experienced that or met someone who's a forester.
Yeah, it's green side up. Keep the trees growing. In the South, you're growing loblolly pines, which you grow in plantations over the course of 17 years. So, you plant, you thin, you eventually harvest, and then you burn the track, and then you replant again. And, it's really about managing a team of loggers, of planters, of, it's pretty wild to be a 5-year-old growing up in Arkansas. And I remember driving 4-wheelers with tanks of kerosene on the back, which is what they use to burn tracks. And I can only imagine, I have a 5-year-old now. I can't even imagine doing something like that. But yeah, it was fun and very different from I feel like a lot of my peers, certainly in the tech world.
And I'm guessing you didn't know any different, right? Like, did you know out in the world kind of, had you traveled when you were a kid to know what city life was like? Or
I mean, look, my parents didn't, I mean, they did an awesome job of getting me exposure to the outside world. I think a lot of the people in the town where I lived, and it was a tiny town, there are 1,500 people in the town, there are about 5,000 in the whole county. There wasn't a lot of travel. There wasn't a lot of exposure to the outside world. But my parents, went to high school together in Delaware. They grew up in the suburbs of Philly. So, they had an educated upbringing. They just decided they wanted to live out in the woods. And so that's where I grew up. But they did a really amazing job exposing me to a lot of things as a kid that, I would say the average person or even the 90th percentile person in South Arkansas doesn't get exposed.
Yeah.
To.
And besides, kind of playing outside and driving, trucks with kerosene on them, what else did you like to do as a kid? Like, what else were you into?
Well, I got into video games pretty early on, and I got into technology pretty early on. As I said, largely by default. There's not a lot else to do in South Arkansas. And so I got my first computer in 1994. Had an internet connection, not a very good one. Got into gaming communities, started modding games. And, that really kind of was my entree into, I guess, technology.
And what were some of these games like in the mid 90s? I mean, and were you playing them on the computer, like online?
Yeah, I've always been a PC gamer, partly because, that's what I had. I had a PC. I don't even think I knew what a console was until I got to college. And so, yeah, I mean, it was primarily, slow strategy games, things like that. Big player of games like Civilization, AOE, and various derivations of those. So played a lot of that sort of thing. And, did a lot of modding and building on top of stuff like that.
I just want to know why I didn't pursue forestry.
You know, I think it requires a special type of person to go into their father's business. And that there are some people that see that and say, like, that's what I want to do. I want to follow in those footsteps.
Yeah.
And there are other people who say literally anything else. And I don't think that has a lot to do with the profession and more about the personality of the person. And I'm definitely in the latter bucket.
Yeah.
I never even thought about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you mentioned 13, I think, was when you ended up moving out of Arkansas. Was that right?
Yeah.
Is that right? And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
what happened there? Like, did you end up, and that's like kind of when you're in middle school, almost starting high school, maybe?
Yeah,
First year of high
Just
school?
about.
Yeah, so I went to my parents moved to Shreveport, Louisiana, which, on the spectrum of Los Angeles and New York is not a particularly exciting place. On the spectrum of rural South Arkansas is like massive, global metropolis. So I went to school there, and that was definitely a new world, and got me in with I think for the first time kids that were also into things like video games and hacking and doing things a little bit different other than hunting and fishing.
Brad, did you know that at the time that you were, in college or around these people that, there would be some sort of a, whether it's career or some sort of a business that would be coming out of your interest in the gaming and, quote unquote computer world?
No, not at all. I don't think I at that time really had a conception of business. The closest I probably had is my grandfather on my mom's side is an entrepreneur. He started much more in kind of the old school mid century sense. He started a chain of auto parts distributors, and that was an inspiration of mine. He was
Is
very.
it a company that we might know or
No? He sold it and retired in 1980.
I was like, maybe it's like AutoZone, Family Money. I don't
know. No. Not that kind of.
Brad's just investing his wealth.
No, I'm sure he did fine, but not nearly of that order of magnitude.
Right,
probably
got it. Okay,
several.
Good perspective.
Yes. No, so but that was still an example of nobody in South Arkansas was doing that.
Right.
So, but no, I don't think I had a direct conception of business. I always wanted to do things my own way and do things differently, and kind of surprise and delight people. With the mods I built for games, I really enjoyed people using what I had built. I really enjoyed kind of getting out there, seeing things I had built and things I had done touch a lot of people. So, beyond that, I don't really think I had a business, any sensibility of what the business world could be.
What's an example of some of those things that you were working on that you said, touched a lot of people?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of specific examples. I mean, they would just be little modifications for these games that would improve the experience or create new scenarios or new things people could play. I spent probably hundreds of hours doing that as a kid.
So you taught yourself how to code, or did it have anything to do with coding? Or
I think from the vantage point where I sit today, coding would be a pretty overestimate for what it was. It was definitely programming of a sort, but using a lot of the tools, languages that were in these games, kind of messing around with what we had. So it was fun, but it doesn't. I can get more into things I did in gaming further down the road, but at that stage, I wasn't doing anything particularly sophisticated.
Yeah. People listening might kind of draw the conclusion, growing up kind of where you grew up in, kind of, the secluded area in Arkansas, and then also being into computers as a kid, like they might think, you might be like antisocial or an introvert. Is that something that's true, or are you like a pretty social, extroverted person as well? Because the reason I ask is because I think there's a misconception or just like something like a thought that people in business or entrepreneurs are always like super extroverted. I'm just kind of curious what you are.
I was painfully introverted. I did not have a lot of friends. I was very much what you think of. I spent a lot of time in my room playing and building video games. It wasn't really until high school, college that I kind of trained myself and said, hey, this isn't what I want with my life. I want to be out there more. I want to be doing more things. Part of creating cool things and making an impact on the world is actually getting out there. And, the social piece of it, physical engineering and social engineering. And so, I trained myself to be an extrovert.
How did you do that? I'm curious because I feel like, there was a lot of people around all of us. I'm sure a lot of folks listening that when they're growing up in middle school, junior high, high school, there's all these people that at the time, frankly, like we're like, oh, like what are these? Like, they're kind of weird, like even though now it's like everybody's weird, and you kind of realize
cool to be weird now.
Yeah. Now it's like if you're not weird, you're like, what's wrong with you?
You're boring.
So weird is the new normal. But how did you train yourself? Because I feel like I'm having the opposite moment in my life of like I am super extroverted, and I'm like, how do I become less super extroverted? Yeah. Right. And I feel like there's a lot of people that have that, like, I guess I don't want to call it an alteration, but that moment I feel like in life where they're like, well, maybe I want to try this out, and I want to be a little different.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that feels like.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is, like, I actually feel like I've become much less extroverted, since having kids, particularly since having my second. And maybe it's just like, it's a life stage hitting the back half of your 30s. Right. Like, you really, I don't want to say just retrench your social circle, but like, there's just fewer people who matter.
Mm-hmm.
And you really want to invest and spend the limited time you have on the people who really matter. But I think that's happened largely by default, whereas, training myself to be a little more extroverted was a very intentional effort. One thing I did, which I would really, anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation of maybe being in a school they don't like, maybe being in in high school and middle school in a scene they don't like. There are a lot of competitions and contests, and that involve a lot of travel. And one way I got out of South Arkansas is I signed up for all of them. I even signed up and found myself in this former Soviet science competition. It was only the second year that America had fielded a team. And that I went to Australia to compete for that.
And what kind of competitions are these?
This was, I would sign up for anything. I was just
singing, or
what was that?
Like singing competitions?
No. Like anything academic. I'm not I was not, and still am not, a particularly like athletic person. No. And have absolutely no singing talent. I'm generally talentless, but I can bust my ass and memorize a lot of things.
Yeah.
Or, I'm pretty good intuiting things, and I'm really good taking tests. So, and there's a surprising number of competitions for like a sixth grader where you can like do really well if you memorize things and take tests well. And I did all of them. And so I just did it as a way to like get out, meet people, like meet other interesting folks. Like, you're in ninth grade, you're in 10th grade, you're painfully awkward. You've got a pretty limited social circle in South Arkansas, at the time Louisiana. It's a good way to get out there and meet people, and it forces you to be an extrovert.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you were a pretty good student in school.
I was, yes.
So what did you end up doing after high school? Like, what did you want to study? Like, what was kind of the path that you were technically wanting to be on?
Yeah, I had no idea. I, had just done this ex-Soviet competition, which was in biology. So people told me I was good at it. So that's what I decided to major in. I went to Yale. And, 2 years in, I decided I didn't particularly like biology. And, a year in, I decided that what I really want to do is start a biotech company. And then I realized that the biotech part of it actually didn't matter at all. I really just wanted to start a company. And, I just found myself doing it almost by default. First thing I did, and this was my freshman year of college, found a way to make money buying antique furniture from the school, like old surplus Yale inventory, mostly card catalogs. Like they were renovating their library. They had a ton of these like giant 400-pound pieces of wood that, remember the Dewey Decimal System where like you pull out the little cabinets and they have all the cards in there and that's how you find a book. So they're getting rid of all their card catalogs, these beautiful things, weigh about 400 pounds. And they were selling them for $50 a pop. So my friend, Matt Breimer, who went on to be one of my co-founders of General Assembly, and I bought as many as we could. We somehow moved them all to a warehouse in East Haven, Connecticut.
How many were there?
30, 40, 50.
And there was like a department at the school that sold this to people? Or
Department of Traffic Receiving and Stores at Yale. And turns out all universities have one of these that just deals with like surplus furniture and mostly just sells it to employees.
Crazy.
Who would have thought?
But we were students showing up saying, we will take all of it. And we got on a first name basis with the dude who ran the warehouse because we would show up with cash and a U-Haul and he could go home early on Friday.
Who were your customers?
So interesting. We were like, who buys this stuff? Well, turns out middle-aged women love this shit. And we would buy a card catalog for $50 and we would sell it. We started on eBay. We eventually built our own e-commerce site. We built our own brand called Aloysius Properties. We would sell this shit for $1,500 a pop.
Oh my God.
$2,000 plus shipping.
So my question is, why didn't you just go like to every college in the country and just create a business out of this? Because those margins sound pretty amazing.
They're great. We eventually ran out of furniture.
Wow.
Because
it's crazy to think of that things that were new weren't becoming old quick enough.
Right. So the problem is there's some, and we tested all of this. There's some stuff that moves. So if it's wood, if it looks antique, if like you think Harvard, Yale, Princeton, like you think big antique mahogany furniture, that did great. But really, a lot of what they had was like 1970s office furniture.
Yeah.
Which weirdly would be cool today.
Yeah. That's like
now
mid-century modern now.
Right. Now all the mid-century modern stuff, that's what people want.
Yeah.
But in 2004, that was going in the trash heap. And, we couldn't move it.
Yeah.
And so we eventually ran out of furniture. But it was extraordinary business while we had it.
I'm kind of curious. I'm curious how you even got to this point, because I know you mentioned your grandfather was an entrepreneur. It sounds like, I don't know how much kind of that played a role in your mindset and wanting to be an entrepreneur, start a business. But you talk about how it's kind of a gradual thing from, going into biology and then just eventually just wanting to run a company, any company, as long as it was yours. What was going through your head, and why do you think that was the case?
When I think about some of the other things I did through high school and college, I don't necessarily believe I was ever particularly motivated by, I want to start a massive business or an empire. I mean, a lot of the things we did were like I was involved in a group that did huge pranks. We did a lot of funny things. And part of that goes back to what I said earlier about just like doing things that touch a lot of people, that surprise them, that delight them. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. And if I made some money along the way, that was great. And so I feel like certainly back then, in those early years, so much of what I was doing was just driven by creativity and wanting to do something different and interesting. And if it happened to involve making money, I wasn't averse to making money in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, it was exciting to make money. That was a pretty new thing for me. And when we started seeing the margins of the furniture business, that was certainly a wake-up call.
The margins, I feel like, have still kept up even with new products in furniture. It's just they probably buy it for $100 and sell for $7,000.
Oh, I mean, the funny thing is, and I'll do a little plug for my friend Matt's new business. He's now gone back into the furniture business finally after 20 years. With his fiance started a company called ZZ Driggs, which is a high-end furniture rental business. They're doing really well, and he's helping her run it. So definitely, I would say much higher quality furniture than what we were getting from Yale, and I believe a much more sustainable business. I don't think they're going to run out anytime soon.
Were you doing this all 4 years? I think you said this was like your freshman year, right? You started this?
Yeah, it probably took. I was probably doing it for 2.5 years. Crazy.
And so I guess you graduate, I'm assuming, with this degree in biology. What did you? What comes next?
Oh, by that point, I had started a game development studio.
Okay.
Yeah, which I started once again with Matt. We built massively multiplayer online games in Flash. We had this thesis that casual gaming and multiplayer gaming would intersect, and that rivalries, and that basically the manifestation of that is sports, online sports. We basically got esports all wrong. We thought it would come from the casual competitive angle as opposed to, Korean dudes who spend 110 hours a week doing it. So we got it totally backwards.
Yep.
So we started this game studio that made basically MMOs in Flash. Our first game was a Risk-like game called Go Cross Campus, where colleges battled against each other. Each turn was a day, so these tournaments would take 2-3 months. We got sponsors. We basically ran it like we were the online NCAA. And it did, it got crazy user numbers. 20, 30,000 concurrent players. Wow. Which was a lot for that type of game back at that time. Never really figured out a business model for it. I mean, sponsorship dollars were okay until 2008 when they went away. So unfortunately, that business went under in the global financial crisis, which was only a year after I graduated school.
Wow. You mentioned Matt a couple times, and sounds like this is like, it's been a recurring theme of you guys starting businesses together. How did you two meet? And what do you think is the reason why you were so well suited to kind of run a company together?
Yeah, totally. So we met in college. We were actually part of a kind of mischief and urban exploration group, where we would do pranks on the college campus and things like that. And when I say that our furniture business really started as an extension of the pranks, I'm not joking. It really did.
So, but what happens? You guys just meet and you decide, let's just do pranks. Like, what was like that? What was like the genesis of all?
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of a group that was already going on that did it, and we got to know each other through that. So we work together really well. I tend to be much more operational. I love operating. I love getting into the weeds. I love numbers, quantitative side. I mean, Matt is a magician. He's an extraordinary creative, an extraordinary marketer. So I think we do have a very complementary skill set. We had, I would say, the furniture business was a nice single. The game development shop unfortunately got crushed by the GFC. That didn't go anywhere. It was a strike. And then General Assembly, which we started together in 2010, was a real win.
Brad, what were you feeling like in 2008? During that GFC, was it apprehension? Was it excitement? What were you feeling? I mean, like you had this game development studios not succeeded at this point.
Yeah.
So what comes next? I mean, put us where your mind was in that time.
Oh, I mean, well, first of all, I was extraordinarily broke, like broke beyond broke. All of my money had gone into living expenses, into the game development studio. I wasn't really paying myself a salary for a long time. So I remember a lot of that time was just, survival, doing little, contract gigs. Someone would pay me $500 to, advise them on game design. Get a couple of those in a month. So it was a very, very, very tough time. I was, and it was not fun. It was extremely stressful, and not something. We didn't have many employees at the game development studio, but winding that down was extremely hard, and then kind of being left, living in New York, no family here, not a lot of options. Really scraping by was that was a really hard time.
At that point, did your mindset shift at all from how you used to think and feel in college, where it's like, I don't really care if I'm making money off of this thing. I just want to have fun and touch a lot of people. And if it didn't, why not? Like, I'm just kind of curious, because that's a moment I feel like, you're a little older now, friends or people around you are working full time, making probably great salaries in their corporate jobs. And you're kind of trying to figure things out. Like, what was going through your mind at that time?
Well, remember, it was the GFC, so nobody who graduated in 08, by and large, was working, earning great salaries in their corporate jobs. I mean,
right.
My peers who had gone into banking, had all been furloughed or laid off. Similar to the only people who were doing all right were the people who went on to grad school, which that wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yep.
So I didn't necessarily feel that I was unique in my circumstance. And, I just focused on keep the personal burn rate low. Don't do anything that, I knew I wanted to start another company. I knew I wanted to take a big swing. Don't do anything that jeopardizes my ability to do that. Mm-hmm. I, at one point then moved in, with my then girlfriend, now wife, which was awesome. And having that partnership really helped me get through it. And so it's I scraped by and made it happen. And some of those contracts that I had to do, were pretty miserable work. But it's, I got by and, was able to move on to the next thing, which fortunately ended up working.
Brad, so how did you guys come up with, the idea for General Assembly? And, obviously talk to us about a little about what it was early on.
Yeah, totally. So it was many things early on. And, what General Assembly became was an evolution out of what it originally was, which was a combination of co-working, events, education. We really wanted, and we called it an urban campus, where we wanted to gather a lot of people in the tech community in New York, which was very nascent at the time. We wanted to gather them in one place. So you had Matt and I kind of working on this co-working concept. This was pre-WeWork. We met up with our other two co-founders around that time. Adam, who was very interested in education and the role education could play, and Jake, who was also in the tech community, had just gotten his MBA and was very interested in what we were doing from all those angles. So we decided to join forces and say, hey, this all makes sense in one place. At the time, it was sort of a unique moment in time because office space was extraordinarily cheap, and owners would basically pay you to come and take space. So we found, it was around 16,000 square feet at 902 Broadway. It's right at 21st and Broadway in Flatiron in Manhattan, which is kind of the hub of what is now the Silicon Alley New York tech scene. But back then, that wasn't really a thing. And we jumped on it and signed the lease. And we'd raised a little bit of seed money. We'd gotten a grant from New York City. We got a lot of deposits from a bunch of startups who wanted to work out of our cool co-working space. Remember, once again, this is pre-WeWork, so there wasn't a lot of co-working in New York. And the co-working that existed was like cube farms. There was really nothing of quality space for people to work.
And how did you end up meeting Jake and Adam, and how did you guys conceive this idea together? Like, what was that initial process like?
I don't necessarily. I think Matt found both of them. I mean, he is a preeminent networker, and I think he somehow in the tech community, as he was evangelizing this idea, found both of them and brought them in. And we really didn't see General Assembly from the beginning as a startup. We saw it as a space, a cash flow positive thing that would raise our profiles and help us get into whatever we were going to do next.
So the plan was just really run this on the side, like create the space and just go on and do our things in our career.
Exactly. So we never saw it as a startup. We never set it up as a startup. I remember because at one point we had to convert it from an LLC to a C Corp. Once we realized that we're actually going to raise money and try to scale this thing. But one thing we did, which was really smart, is we built a classroom out. Because we always wanted there to be an education component to it. Because we saw a lot of what was happening in tech was pretty undemocratic. It was, people who had been coding their entire lives, people who grew up like I did, taking these high-paying tech jobs. It was very, very tough if you didn't have that background to get into tech. There weren't tech job boards back then. There weren't incubators and accelerators back then the way there are today. And so we wanted to democratize that and really create a space and a venue for people who didn't have tech backgrounds to get exposed to technology. So,
and that was actually from that, I feel like one thing I always noticed about GA and just like friends that went through the programs were that all the things that they maybe didn't get out of a 4-year college degree that they should have probably gotten, right? Like the experience or just like the knowledge around a particular area that was super relevant at that time. Like, for example, UI, UX design, right? Like you might have been a designer in college at the time. I don't, early 2010s, they didn't have courses necessarily around that stuff. And especially in a lot of the kind of other not the top tier colleges, if you will. And so people were sort of going there to actually get the knowledge that they needed to do the job well, right? And everything else didn't really matter that they got in their 4-year degree as much. And so how did was that something that, I guess, was that the thing that really took it off? Like what was kind of I know you mentioned the co-working side and like these startups signing up for it. What was like kind of that thing that made it more than a side project for you guys?
Education. You're exactly right. So in that classroom, we started initially in a small way. We would offer a class every evening, then 2 classes every evening, teaching things like UX design, JavaScript, how to start your venture, how to apply for a tech job, what is product management. Like, we would teach all these things and we would iterate. Like, we would learn, like, hey, here are the things that work and here are the things that don't work. And we would just keep doubling down on the things that worked. And the thing that really shifted it from a side project to, and made us say, oh, wow, we're onto something, is when we launched our first full-time course, which was a big leap to say, hey, we're actually going to go out and offer a 3-month full-time program that will teach someone enough programming to get them a junior level job as a programmer.
But how did you get, the part about that is, the big question mark, if let's say I was starting that business or whatever, would be, how do you get the trust and the, like the accreditation, if you will, like, of like these colleges that these companies know so well that, if someone coming out of this college is qualified to have a position here. But then, you have General Assembly come along and maybe at the time, obviously no one really knew about it, these companies, until they sort of caught wind on it. And over time you built that trust. But how was it in the beginning being able to kind of build it up to that point?
Well, by the time we launched our first full-time course, we had been offering classes for over a year. So we'd actually built, one thing we did really well is building an email list, building a lot of recognition and love in the startup and tech community. We would host events every weekend, hackathons, startup events, pitch events. We had a happy hour every Friday night. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of a special moment in time in New York tech, those happy hours. And I think over time, we earned the trust of a lot of people who they would come to a class and it was good. They would come to another class and it was good. They would come to another class and it was good. They said, hey, you know what? I'm going to quit my job and become a developer. I'm going to quit my job and go into tech. And the way they did that is they signed up for our course.
And what's interesting, and I noticed this too early on, was you guys, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you guys were going after people who are already like in the workforce, professionals at companies teaching these courses. And so that's a super interesting thing when it comes to like a hiring pipeline, where it's like they're in the companies that perhaps the people taking these courses want to go work for after GA. And was that like a thought out plan by you guys, or that was what
absolutely.
It was?
I mean, because we look at the whole thing as a flywheel. And this, particularly as we got more into enterprise, into working with larger companies and training their workforces, is a really important part of the flywheel. And this has always been really important to us. And I think it's one of the reasons GA succeeded. Is a lot of schools just scale up, and as long as they can charge tuition, they're going to keep growing. We always and religiously measured outcomes, because if people are signing up for a 3-month course and they don't get a job at the other end, and they're not happy with what they were able to achieve, we're not going to succeed. And so we were religious about measuring outcomes, not just did they get a job, but did they get a job within 90 days, and did they get a job within the field in which they were trained? And so we were the first to come out with an independent third-party audited statement about our outcomes and our placement success. And that's what was always super, super important for us for day one. It's a relationship with employers too.
Brad, there's no doubt, obviously, that GA found success, and we'll talk more about it. But I'm putting myself just for a moment in the shoes or eyes of an investor and think to myself, you have these guys that are, recent graduates, 2 from Yale, 2 from I don't know where, with not much work experience, frankly, besides what they've built entrepreneurially. And, during the GFC, why would I invest with guys, these 4 people that they're telling people how to get a job when they haven't necessarily got a job? They're telling people how to, do UX and product design and management when they don't have a lot of years under their belt either. Again, I'm not saying
totally.
you guys were in qual, but like, what the hell were you guys thinking? Right? Like,
well, one of the things we did well at General Assembly, and it definitely decreased our level of stress, is we built a cash flow business first.
Through the rentals of the space.
Off education. I mean, the space was profitable, but like education was the big driver of revenue pretty early on. Because the space, I mean, we filled it up and that capped it out. And actually, I think in 2013, we needed more office space. So we ended up shutting the co-working down and moving our own team into it. So we always raised after the fact. So, and I advise entrepreneurs a lot who are thinking about raising. I'm like, well, the easiest raise is when you don't need it. And when the facts and the data speak for themselves. So I think we really could have been at, certainly at a certain stage, at the early stages, like we could have been anybody. And the data was pretty convincing. The growth, the unit economics, the narrative, and that's the best way to go out and race, is when the data, the business growth speaks for itself. And by that point, we had hired executives, we had people around the table who were helping us out.
Right.
And obviously that's obviously from a standpoint of raising that money, like in terms of having leverage, it's a great place to be if you're looking to raise money. But do you find that often when companies are raising big rounds when they don't need to? Is it just to scale faster, or?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the best rounds are raised by companies who don't need to raise. It's really about where that money coming in is really about incremental investment. It's about acquisitions. It's about building fortress of a balance sheet. It's not because they're burning so much money that they absolutely have to raise.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like, and so they can self-sustain, but it just they might be missing out on certain opportunities if they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So okay, we could keep running the business, so we don't need to raise this round. But if we raised it, here are the things we could do. And certainly by 2013, so 3 years in, it was clear it was a bit of a land grab for tech education and training. And so, at that point, it was, even though we did have a sustainable business, we needed to raise because we needed to keep up with all the other operators in the space.
And Brad, what was your role at GA as, the company continued to grow?
Yeah, totally. So my original assignment was to run and grow the education business. When that became the bulk of the business, I took a chief product officer role. So Jake was the CEO, and I ran product.
Did you guys? I know, so it was 4 of you, right? When you started, how was that experience like? You hear arguments of having a lot of co-founders or not having. So, I mean, for you guys, how was that experience? Because it sounds like initially there were different parts of the business where you can kind of focus on that, but as everything kind of converged into like this education thing, did that cause any issues or problems?
Well, it's also situational. I think each one of us brought something pretty unique to the table. So in that particular situation, I don't regret the way we did it, but I wouldn't in the abstract ever advise a founder to do anything like that. Mm-hmm. I think 1 is fine. I started common by myself. 2 is great. 3 is workable. Anything above that, you got to have a really good reason.
Yeah.
And I think, remember, we started General Assembly not as a not as a scalable business, but kind of as this, cash flow partnership.
Yeah, at that point, it's like, let's get as many people involved so we can, kind of, diversify the work and not, because, yeah.
So are you able to share what happened and some of the failures and learnings of that, and what perhaps folks that even have one co-founder or two co-founders can avoid?
Well, once again, it's also situational, and it's tough to generalize.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, one thing I wish we had done sooner is kind of made it clear, like, Jake's the CEO. He's a tremendously good CEO, making sure he had that power and the full authority as CEO was a little bit too much of a democracy in the early days. And I think we could have moved faster had we moved to an authoritarian model a little bit sooner, I would say. So I think it is important, even if you start kind of as even equal partners, that it is unequivocal who is in charge. That's something I would strongly recommend to anyone in any kind of co-founder situation. Is even if there is, some sharing of responsibilities, even if equity is split evenly, make sure somebody is running the show.
Right.
Yeah. So what ended up happening with General Assembly and also with you? I think I saw that you were there till like 2015-ish. What happened there?
Yeah, totally. So I left in 2015 to start Common. Really have always been excited about the residential space. Also, wanted to run my own thing. I spent 5 years at General Assembly. We'd at that point topped 100 million in revenue. It would take another 3 years before we finally exited the business in 2018. We were acquired by Adecco for 412 million. So it was a great outcome for everybody. And super thankful for, executives and my co-founder, Jake, who stuck around and got that over the line. So it was a great outcome. I moved on in 2015 to start Common. I've always been passionate about residential, ways to make housing better. So that's why I've been working on, I guess, good Lord, for 7 years now, almost 7 years.
What is Common?
Yeah, so Common is
and I know you said you have a passion for it, but how did the idea come? And I assume it came while you were at GA.
Yeah, so Common is a residential operator and brand. And we started initially just focused on co-living. Co-living is basically roommates done better. 25 million Americans live with roommates. They are an underserved segment of the market. I mean, when I first moved to New York, working at my game development studio, I rented a room on Craigslist. And I had a great experience. I rented it from a guy I didn't know at all. He's a real estate broker. He would wake up 8:00 every morning, cook bacon and smoke a bowl. And that was my introduction to New York.
You started smoking bowls and eating bacon.
Can't complain. So that being said, a lot of people who live with roommates don't have a great experience. Yeah. And so we started Common really to address that audience. And one of the great things about co-living is it's a true win-win. There are not many win-wins in residential, in real estate at all. And it's a win-win because on one hand, renters are able to rent at a much lower chunk rent than, say, a studio apartment. They're able to get into a nicer building than they would be able to otherwise, without kind of going through the rigmarole, the risk, the pain of Craigslist. And particularly what we're doing is we're building ground up units that are designed with roommates in mind. So it really feels like a great experience. Private bathrooms often, ample common area for the people who are living in these spaces. It's also a win for the owner, for the developer. They're able to, earn more per square foot because there is higher density. So it's one of the few win-wins you really get in real estate, and that's been a strong driver of the business. We've since, in around 2019, we expanded beyond co-living into managing, have full suite of residential product. And today we have around 8,000 units under management, another 15,000 units currently signed and under construction.
So, Brad, I actually work in real estate as well. So I don't work on the residential side. I work more on the commercial, like mainly industrial and office side.
Yep.
But I'm curious, how does someone that had, again, like it's very similar to GA, had no background perhaps in, teaching or education of technology or coding or product design, et cetera. I mean, how did you teach yourself to, because I think you said you did ground up development. How did that even come to be? I mean, in New York, especially of all places, I assume that's where you started. I mean, it's not the easiest thing to just wake up one day and be like, I'm going to start doing ground up, development.
Yeah, totally. And to be clear about our role, we do design and we do management. We don't do any development or investment ourselves. So that does make it a lot easier.
Yes, it does. That just simplified it like tenfold.
Yes, absolutely. So the design piece is really using data, insights, things we have to help inform floor plans, finishes, fixtures, furniture, et cetera. And then the management piece is running these buildings once they're open and operating. And there's a feedback loop between those things. Obviously, when we manage, we get a lot of data. We know what works, we know what doesn't work, and we can feed that back into the design. And that's a really important part of what we do. So yes, and I that being said, there's a very steep learning curve in real estate. Real estate finance, totally different than the finance you encounter as a venture-backed founder. I remember the first time I learned that many real estate owners see a refinance, basically taking debt as their exit. They build, they stabilize, they refi, they go on to the next one. Now it's just like, well, of course that's what happens. Like that's how it works. Maybe you sell, maybe you refi. But at the time, it was like, well, that's absolutely absurd. You're taking on debt, and that's your exit. So I really, truly knew nothing about real estate when I started when I started Common. To be clear.
And so 7 years in, like, what would you say are some of the biggest kind of challenges that you faced doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not all been up and to the right. I think you may notice we're like about the last surviving co-living company in existence, which is great because it means we have pretty much 100% win rate on co-living deals at this point. I think there's a couple of reasons why co-living has been a very challenging business. One is it takes a long time to build product. Like on average, a ground up deal takes 3 to 4 years from us beginning the conversation to actually having a building up and running. Because often we begin the conversation when the owner is still like looking at sites, thinking about business plans, and they have to acquire the site, then they have to do the entitlements, then they have to get their construction financing, then they actually have to build it. So 3 to 4 years is a very reasonable time. 3 to 4 years is an absolutely unworkable sales cycle in a venture-backed business. Like the worst of the worst of the worst, selling into, I don't know, government, K-12, like.
Unless you're actually selling the business itself,
Right.
4 years.
So, and one of the reasons we expanded into conventional multifamily is just that we were getting killed by our own sales cycle. We would sign a lot of deals, and they would be good deals, but it would take a very, very long time for them to deliver. And you're not able to get the scale on an individual deal level if you're doing kind of adaptive reuse renovations, things like that. The deals are just too small. So that was probably been the biggest challenge. Unfortunately, we expanded into conventional multifamily. We have a centralized management model, with a lot of tech and automations, able to generate a lot of OpEx savings on the ground for managing these multifamily assets. And that's led to a huge amount of growth over the last 2 years. And we've gone from 1,500 units under management to today around 8,000. So the last 2 years have been really transformative for us.
Brad, do you ever plan on getting onto the ownership side of that? So, whether it's doing some sort of a joint venture with those developers or just buying them outright and managing it that way, or finding perhaps other investors and, managing, all of these assets or a portfolio or whatever it may be. I mean, is there something that can be done to perhaps shorten that cycle to meet investor demand or venture back demand, if that's still the case, and also run a lucrative business?
Yeah, totally. Well, so I'll answer those in the other order. So we've really solved the problem of ground up timing by expanding what we do to include
right.
more conventionally designed assets.
Yeah, it's like a hedge on your portfolio, essentially. At that point.
I mean, we do a lot of co-living, but if we have a client and they have a traditional asset delivering next year,
right,
we're happy to take that over and manage it too, and we can add value there.
Sure.
So that's a big part of it. In terms of getting involved on the ownership side, it's something we've debated a lot internally in the early years, and we really made a strategic decision not to. That we wanted to focus on the management business for a couple of reasons. One is because we believe that there are that we didn't want to mix different types of cash flow, different types of assets in one corporate entity. We didn't want to, when people bought shares of common, we didn't want them to be buying, a little bit of real estate, a little bit of management cash flow, a little bit of tech cash flow. We wanted it to be very straightforward. The second, which is a much bigger deal today, is we don't want to compete against our clients. So, one of the biggest challenges of hiring a property manager is that many residential property managers also own and develop, which means they're using the data from your building to inform their next development. And there's nothing preventing them from buying the site next door and competing against you. And that's something that really bothers a lot of real estate owners and real estate developers, is that their vendor is also their competitor. And we believe that there's a big opening for a pure play third-party manager to come in with a neutral standpoint. It's not going to prioritize our own deals, and it's not going to use our clients' data to inform our own development.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So where does Common go from here?
Yeah, so today the focus is really scale. So continuing to expand relationships with our existing clients and accounts, adding a lot more automation onto particularly the leasing and marketing process of what we do. So our plan over the next year is by the end of 2022, we will have a product that lets someone go fully through the leasing process without talking to a human being. If they want to talk to a human being, they're certainly able to do that. And not just book a room the way you would at a hotel, but actually sign, a 12-month lease for a unit. So go through a virtual or self-guided on-site tour, go through credit check, background check, income verification, lease paperwork, and move into the unit, all automated. So there's a lot of pushes we're doing into some pretty exciting technology.
Have you felt as though tenants want that automation, or they still want to talk to that human being? I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're renting, buying, what I've seen personally is that they like that human connection, because I mean, it's a big part and a big expense of your life, whether you're putting a down payment on a house, buying an investment property, or renting an apartment, studio, condo, whatever it may be. It's a pretty big sum of money. Right. And so I'm just curious from, your perspective and the data that you have, what have you seen in terms of customer response?
Yeah, totally. So we see it actually being very age dependent. Generally people on our side of 30 want to talk to a human. But the younger you go, the more they are excited about not having to do that. And frankly, virtual touring technology, self-guided tour tech is good enough at this point that someone can get a really good sense of the unit without talking to another human being.
Right.
And the rest is just automation. It is just software. So we found, particularly with our products that tend to target a little bit younger. So, across our entire portfolio, our median age is 29. For our co-living and our micro apartment product, that's going to skew a little bit younger than that. And it's differentiated. If every other owner requires that every other manager requires that you talk to a human and come on site to fill out an application, and we're saying, no, you can do it all automated. It's all online. It's all self-serve. That's a meaningful differentiator.
I know that there's a huge housing crisis throughout the entire United States. I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, but I've heard that we need 10%, at least 10% more than what we have currently. I'm sure that number is probably even higher than what I've last heard it. Um, where do you think we're going in terms of the rental or renting versus owning kind of, track? Are more people still trying to own, just like I assume our parents' generation was? Or have they just accepted that, you know what, we don't need to own, we don't want to be in one place, we don't want to commit to a city for the rest of our lives, and we're okay renting short term or long term?
Well, there are a lot of different things going on at once. I mean, one, you have a lot of millennials. The millennials are a pretty large generation. Just in terms of generational waves.
Yep.
There's kind of a peak in sort of what is, would today be 30 to 35. And that's naturally just, secular trends aside, when people tend to settle down, move out to the suburbs, have kids. So that is going on, and that is creating, in addition to what happened with the pandemic, a huge rush on single family homes. So single family home prices across the board have just gone through the roof. That then has trickle down effects into the rental market. So if someone bids on 10 different single family homes and loses every time, they're probably going to renew their lease. Or they may, go and lease a slightly nicer apartment to make room for their new baby, or, they just earn more money, but not enough money to buy a single family home. So it's trickling down through the rental ecosystem. Out of all that, it's very, very tough to identify revealed preference. If you build a single family rental community, it will fill up at above pro forma. If you build a multifamily project in an urban center, with a couple exceptions, it will fill up at above pro forma. So everything's going up right now, but you also have a very inflationary environment. Wages are going up. So it's very, very tough in the current environment to really isolate revealed preference from all of this. Everything's just going up.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really good way of putting it. And just like thinking about all this stuff, because it is crazy whether you're buying or renting. It's just a crazy time right now, or selling. It's a crazy time right now. But so I guess moving on. I don't know if you had any other questions about Colin, but kind of just to like wrap things up. I'm curious. Would you say you're a man of many interests, or like not like any interest in particular? Because sometimes you come across folks that have this like one track mind of something that they've always just been burning, to do, whether it's a passion or an interest or something. But kind of going from what you were doing in college with the furniture stuff to like GA, and then to now, this. What kind of category do you fall under?
Yeah, totally. So I do think I have a singular focus, but it is a bit more abstract one, which is to create things that touch people in a pretty deep and fundamental way. Yeah. So if you look at like what ties, and people ask me this, like what ties housing to education? Well, the two biggest areas of consumer spend between the ages of 18 and 35. And they're two things where people get a really, really big impact from what we're doing, like life-changing impact from what we're doing. They live in our product. Their product changes their career trajectory. So that kind of, high touch, it really excites me.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. One way to think about it is if like, for example, whoever's listening that maybe might be in college or just like kind of like thinking about what to do now, in that age range, whether it's to start a business or kind of go down a certain career path, is like having this like personal mission of like, what do you want out of it, right? Like, what is like the kind of the core piece of it? Like obviously making money is nice, but that'll come, I guess, if you're, right on that right track. And so what is it? And so, that's maybe one way to avoid, constantly thinking about opportunity cost. Am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing something else? Like, is there something else that's, more for me out there? Right. Like kind of ways to avoid that is like having this core thing to anchor yourself to, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, I know I like, it matters a lot that I'm doing something that is impacting people in a meaningful and positive way. I think working at a company where I'm kind of tweaking an algorithm behind the scenes, would be really, really tough.
Yeah.
You know, I love that, you know, we design and we deliver residential buildings that people live in and people love. That matters a lot.
Actually, one last question. I know you mentioned, or I mean, I think I might have read this, that you're also doing some investing on the side, like with a venture firm that had invested in GA. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was for a period of time in kind of the early days of Common, but and they're investors in Common and they're very, very good friends of mine. But I'm not day-to-day investing with them today.
Oh, not anymore. Okay, I was just gonna ask. Like, I know there's so many things going on in the tech space. Like, what you're kind of most excited about, but you can still answer the question, I guess, whether or not.
Yeah, totally. Look, I am, and this kind of goes back to what I've been doing and what I'm focused on. I think, you know, there are a lot of people that are, I think, very rightly focused on, you know, Web3, crypto, all that fun stuff. But I look at it and I'm like, you know, Web2 still has such low penetration in so many industries that are still living in, you know, Web 1 or even like pre-Web days.
Yeah,
I really get excited by people who are tackling things that are a little bit off the beaten path. You know, go back, you know, to my origins. My, you know, father is a forester. It's like, what kind of tech are they using? Someone who builds something that serves their needs and makes their lives better and easier, even if it's, you know, Web 2 technology, that's still a massive improvement over what a lot of these industries are using today. So things that get me excited are, you know, going into big, meaty, hairy spaces, often regulated, bringing better kind of technology and better outcomes.
I love that.
Imagine the forestry world in like Web3, right? Like, I mean, like how would that work?
I'm sure there are trees in the metaverse too, you know?
There are, but I don't think you got.
But are there foresters in the metaverse? Is the question.
I don't think so. But there could be forester NFTs.
Yeah.
Brad, this has been super fun. I mean, I learned a lot and just kind of got so much out of this. I'm sure people listening did too. And can't thank you enough for, you know, spending your night with us and hanging out and sharing your story and wisdom, and all the best. You know, can't wait to see where things go with Common, but for you personally as well. And, you know, hope to keep in touch.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for having me on tonight. It's been great.